Hello, folks. Welcome to the ARENI convening for university centers. We're going to talk about strategic directions today for university centers. People are continuing to trickle in, but I'm going to just get us started in the interest of time. I'm Sheila Martin, Director of the American Resilience and Equity Networks Initiative. And this initiative is a collaboration between the University Economic Development Administration and the Economic Development Administration. And we are working to build diverse networks of university economic development officials in pursuit of our goals of equity and resilience, and also bringing together the directors of university centers to talk about important issues facing our communities. We are building these networks, encouraging knowledge sharing among these networks, and we'll be building a library of tools that we'll be sharing among these networks. We'll be developing these resources in these tool libraries and identifying gaps in economic development practices and recommendations for closing those gaps. For achieving greater equity and resilience in partnership with EDA and its other programs. So we're going to be bringing you monthly convenings, normally at noon on the first Wednesday of the month, like we're doing today. And I have a book getting what you came here for. Thank you. We are going to be able to access the ARENI Member 365 platform, which is going to be shown on the next slide. Let me go to that. You can join that platform to view the conversations that we're having, as well as the full bios for our speaker today. And with that, I want to introduce Russell Mills. He's the incoming president of the University Economic Development Association, and he's the senior director of the Center for Regional Development at Bowling Green State University. His work focuses on local economic development, improving air transportation, access to communities, and examining the implications of automation on workforce and economic development. Russell will give us an introduction to UEDA.
Thank you, Sheila, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I wanted to give a little bit of background on that for those of you who might be new to the University Economic Development Association. So UEDA connects our members who are typically higher education institutions, economic development organizations, or in some cases, private sector businesses, to resources that facilitate economic growth in their communities. UEDA members represent those that are typically on the cutting edge of modern economic development, which focuses really on the relationship between universities and other players in your community, and attracting industry to your community. Success in our modern economy is less about job attraction, retention in some cases, and more about innovation and entrepreneurship, and the role that university plays in that is quite central. It is about fostering talent and young people from preschool through life to embolden them to think and create outside the traditional academic or professional requirements. It's also about creating environments through placemaking and other efforts that attract those people to want to make and do things in new ways and retain talent to start the process over again in the next generation. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So never before have academia, the private sector, and economic stakeholders been so reliant on one another to create economic opportunity. UEDA members work together to expand economic opportunity in their communities and regions by leveraging talent, innovation, and place, and recognizing the interconnectedness of each of these elements. UEDA members can take advantage of all of our benefits of membership. Most importantly, UEDA provides a forum for collaboration with peers around the globe on higher education, economic engagement activities. So we encourage you to join us by visiting join.universityeda.org, and I believe Spencer will put that in the chat. And then finally, I wanted to mention we have 3 different UEDA networks that really provide collaborative forums, both online and face-to-face, for regular engagement in those 3 key key three topics that I mentioned, which are talent, innovation, and place. There are typically two ways to participate in our UETA networks. One, we have monthly convenings, which some of you we'll go over the next convening that's taking place here I believe next week. These monthly convenings are casual, semi-facilitated sessions where like minds gather to discuss news, challenges, best practices, metrics, resources, and more. The convenings are open to the public, and UETA membership is not required for those. The second forum for participation are our online workspaces, and where users can post questions to the practitioner community, upload and share resources, and collaborate on topics. But in those workspaces are only available to UETA members as a benefit of membership. So we encourage you to join our UETA networks as well.
Thanks, Russell. Before we get started with our discussion today, I would like Spencer to launch a couple poll questions, and I encourage you all to answer them. There's a couple purposes for this. One is we want to know who's in the room so that we can, just focus our discussion in a way that is helpful to you. And second of all, we are collecting data for evaluation of the ARENI program. And so launching these poll questions during the webinar relieves you from the burden of receiving a link later to answer these evaluation questions. So thank you for paying attention as we learn how you heard about the webinar and as soon as we get some answers from that, we'll move on to the next question. So it looks like most folks have answered the first question. So let's go on to most people were responding to the UETA email and joining. And is this your first time? We have a number of first timers here today. It's wonderful to see so many new people entering our community at UETA. It looks like we've got our answers from question 2. So let's go to question 3 now. In your current role, in what area do you most frequently work? Resilience, equity, or connecting communities to higher education institutions? Okay, great. We've got a number of people who are working to connect community to higher education institutions, and we've got a number of folks working in the areas of resilience and equity. So Russell, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Sheila. Welcome again, everybody. And today we wanted to do myself and my co-presenter today, Drew Conrad. So for those of you who don't know Drew, Drew is the director of the Institute for Decision Making at the University of Northern Iowa. I know Drew's been there for quite a while, and they're also a university center like my team here at Bowling Green State University. So Drew and I are going to really lead the conversation today, and we wanted to keep this as open and frankly as casual a conversation as we could. Really, our goals for today are sort of to think through, go through what the university center program is for those of you who may not be familiar with it. And Sheila's going to ask a poll question about that here in a couple minutes, sort of what your relationship might be with the program. And then what we'd like to do is really walk through, some different questions that will help sort of guide us and really thinking of some strategic future directions for the program. Including what existing centers might do with more resources, or if we had more resources for additional centers, what those organizations might do as well. So Before we dive in, I wanted to give a little bit of background on the University Center program for those who may not be familiar or who may not be a EDA designated university center. So EDA university centers typically use university assets to build regional economic ecosystems that support innovation, high growth entrepreneurship, resiliency, inclusiveness, provide planning capacity, placemaking capacity in their regions. University centers also collaborate with other EDA partners, such as economic development districts or EDDs, by providing expertise and technical assistance to develop, implement, and support regional strategies that result in job creation, high-skilled regional talent pools, business expansion in a region's growth clusters, et cetera. For example, a lot of university centers, and we'll go through this a little later, but some examples of the work that university centers do are really, some workforce training programs, applied research, technology commercialization, feasibility studies, economic impact analysis, developing planning, different plans, whether they be economic development plans or workforce plans for their regions, and other technical assistance to really help communities foster vibrant economic ecosystems. The program is competitive, and we'll go through a table here in a moment that has the different regions and breakouts of competitions, as you can see there. The way EDA does this is they typically have each regional office compete among its different folks for the university centers in that region. So I'm in the Chicago region, Drew's in the Denver region. We compete at different years, right? So the Denver regions will be coming up next year. We just went through our last 5-year competition, and last year and reapplied. So we're in year 1 now of our grant for the next cycle. So it's a 5-year award, that you get from EDA for the University Center program. And I believe on the previous slide it mentioned awards typically range from anywhere from $80,000 to $200,000 per year over that 5 years. And with the University Center program, typically there's a 1-to-1 match required. So what EDA is providing you in funds are 50% of the total project cost. Sheila, you want to go ahead on the next slide? And some of the, and I mentioned some of these key areas that university centers focus, and we tried to sort of group them. I'll go through what we do at BGSU here in a moment, but sort of highlight one of the great things I think the University Center program brings to the table is that the work of a university center, or the scope of work, is often very much aligned and should be very much aligned to what the needs are of the communities in the region it's working in. So as I've talked with the folks in the DC office a lot, this is both great and presents some challenges, because if the University Center program does a lot of different things across the country, it's often hard to answer that sort of elevator pitch of what is the University Center program. But here's a list of sort of the buckets that Sheila, Drew, and I came up with that really we think highlight a lot of the different roles that university centers play in their communities. Here I'll just go through our partnership that we have at Bowling Green State University. We've been an EDA center for, I believe, over 25 years, and we're unique in several ways. Ours is a joint university center with our colleagues at Ohio University and the Voinovich School of Public Affairs. So what we do is we cover Northwest Ohio, BGSU, 31 counties up in the Toledo region, all the way down to about Central Ohio. And the OU team covers, I believe, 37 counties in Appalachian, Ohio. So we partner together to do that work, referrals back and forth, expertise sharing in our university center. For our 31 counties in Northwest Ohio, we're again unique in one big way in that we don't have economic development districts. So we perform a lot of those functions through our university center. So we've done several comprehensive economic development strategies, or CEDS, for our region. So for the Toledo region and for other groups of counties in Northwest Ohio. We're engaged in placemaking work. So we're through our Reimagining Rural Regions initiative, or that we go out with teams of students and with our staff and do placemaking work to help revitalize rural communities across Northwest Ohio. And then I would say the other sort of bucket of our work is really data and analytics provision. So we do quite a bit of data analysis work whether that be through some of the different data platforms that we purchase, or through BLS or the census, for communities to help support any other ongoing workforce planning programs they may have, or for economic impact analysis, some of those kinds of technical assistance and economic data provision activities. So with that, I'd like Drew to tell you a bit about their university center to again highlight some of the different approaches that we all take. Drew?
Thanks, Russell. Good morning, everyone. Drew Connor at the University of Northern Iowa. We've been an EDA University Center now. We're in our second round of 5-year grants. So right now we are actually entering the last year of our 5th year of our second grant. Our focus this last 4 years has been on business retention and expansion through innovation, and particularly initially focusing on working with employers within our region. And our focus this time geographically has been in Northeast Iowa, where we are located in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and a focus on particularly helping companies with entrepreneurship within their organization. And my program and several other programs are part under the University Center umbrella here at the University of Northern Iowa. And we work very closely with partners with our local community college, Iowa State University, their manufacturing extension program, which is also a university center, which is kind of unique in Iowa. We have 2 university centers. And obviously, with COVID being thrown in after we started our program, we pivoted a little. And what came out of it is particularly working on a couple statewide efforts related to COVID, gathering data and how the state responded to it. So that kind of threw a hiccup into what our original scope of work that was set out 4 years ago. But we've, in that work through statewide, we've also been very actively participating in a statewide Industry 4.0 initiative. And what we had learned through our work within our region, the need to elevate people's understanding and capacity to understand Industry 4.0, Manufacturing 4.0, it led to us then, the University Center, doing some statewide work on that and helping our economic development community across the state of Iowa and community colleges and other service providers better understand Industry 4.0. So it's been a journey for us on the second round of funding due to COVID and also due to the ever-changing needs within Iowa.
Thanks, Drew. Spencer, why don't we launch poll question 4 so we can find out who in the audience has a relationship to the University Center program. So we've got answers coming in. Some currently manage or work at a university center. Some are considering developing a proposal. And we've got a number of folks who are just curious about what the program's all about. So that's great. We're really glad to welcome new people into information about the program. So I'll turn it back over to Russell and Drew to start our discussion.
Sheila, can we send the next poll question out? Actually, I think that would poll
sure.
question 5.
Sure, let's go with question 5. So if you received a significant increase in your university center funding, how would you direct those funds? Scaling up existing successful programs to serve more companies, populations, or communities, or broadening your focus into new programmatic areas? It looks like we've got more folks saying that they would scale up, but also a significant share of folks saying that they would like to broaden their focus into new areas.
Great. Well, thank you all for answering those questions. So what Drew and I really wanted to do today was again have a conversation. We're not doing this in a webinar format. It's in a meeting format, obviously. So what we'd like folks to do is share their thoughts, their perspectives on some of these questions. So I think what Drew and I really wanted to start with was the first one. If we, and that's why we asked the poll question, if you had more resources, how would you close some of the gaps in your region's economic, workforce, and community development efforts? And And to give some food for thought, I'll just start with what sort of my perspective and what we would do. One of the I mentioned that we do a lot of planning around Northwest Ohio. One of the things we've talked a lot about with my team is really being able to sort of have a more on the ground presence in some communities across our service area. We've often called this the economic development extension service or something like that. That's related to what our extension partners always do as well. So what we were, and it's funny because EDA then went ahead and I don't know if all of you have seen it, but they released a great a NOFO a couple weeks ago where they're rolling out an economic development core, basically like I would say like AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps for foreign countries. But I think I think here in the domestic environment, really where the economic development core is going to provide additional resources to regions to do some of the work that we're already doing as university centers. So I think it's a great supplement. But with additional resources, what our team would like to do is really set up some satellite offices around our region. And really sort of have a bigger presence in some of those communities, and also expand into some other areas where we might not be working. Some on the housing side in particular. I'm trying to assist in some of those areas, and really, for some of the key challenges that our partners are facing across the region, and also scale up our existing placemaking program that we're doing, the Reimagining Rural Regions program. We've seen demand for that program that far exceeds our ability to provide planning assistance, and then ultimately helping communities with the projects that they identify through that planning process. So, scaling up and also broadening our focus a bit. Drew?
Yeah, Russell, ours would be very similar. The standpoint of being able to have more boots on the ground and more time on the ground working with communities, particularly some of the smaller communities. And then also the focus, you mentioned placemaking, but workforce is such a huge issue here in this part of the world, in Iowa and the upper Midwest. And so from us, it would be how can we integrate in some of the work that around workforce that we're doing within our work with business retention and expansion, and being a technical assistance provider to local and regional economic development.
And Sheila put in the chat if do other folks have thoughts on how they would use resources, or if you are not currently a university center, what you would if you wanted or are currently pursuing that, what you would like to bring to your region in terms of capacity. John, I'm looking at you, by the way. John, you want to chime in?
John's got his hand up.
Yeah.
I'm home today, and I was waiting for my son to finish putting something through the microwave. So we've been at this about as long as Russ, I think, and we've got kind of a broad focus, and at this point, we cover almost everything in Virginia outside of the most prosperous parts of our urban crescent, right? Sort of the DC to Richmond suburbs. And I think serving that geography, the money's been flat, in the program. So the idea of, but I think what's an interesting moment, right, is that EDA has gone to some of these larger scale competitions using the Rescue Act funding. And I think that's super exciting. I know we've participated as an institution, a state, in a bunch of those. But I think what's got to go along with that, whether it's through university centers or economic development districts or other sort of the capacity building infrastructure that EDA has had for years, is to scale that up too. Because a lot of what we were able to do in those competitions was because we've been out on our UC hook or on our own university's hook, kind of building capacity over the years to be able to respond. Is there a
that's a good point, John, particularly related to the local capacity, and we've seen ebbs and flows over the years. I've been in this business for 30 years, and you see, okay, some seed money get put into a region to build capacity, but it has a short time span, and then they struggle. And the economic development districts, which in our part of the world are councils of governments, struggle to have that sustainability. long-term and have an impact.
Yeah, and John, I think your point about the larger pots of money is a really important one, because in our region, we also coordinated, our region's Build Back Better, challenge application, as I know you did, right? And so I think, that's an interesting role for universities, not only in that they have capacity, but in a lot of cases, they're viewed as a regional neutral entity that can really convene stakeholders. And I think that's an underappreciated part of what we do as university centers, is really, I find myself in a lot of cases being the one who sort of brings the opportunity to folks, and then ultimately people ask us to convene and sort of lead those kind of regional efforts. I'm curious if anybody else on the call has had that as well.
All right, now's when we start picking on all the people we know, right?
Yeah, I know. That's okay. That may have been a bit of a specific question. So, but let's go back to sort of where we started on this point. If you had more resources, back, to what our initial question, or if you were, as you're applying to become a university center, what are some of the things that you might use those resources for in your region?
I guess I don't want us to do all the talking, but I'll kind of kick things off from as I said earlier, the being able to be on the ground more regularly, I think is one of the benefits, because that community engagement dynamic between an institution of higher ed and its resources and expertise and in communities is often a challenge. And I think as you touched on it earlier, Russell, how economic development, the landscape is changing. You think about a role that a university and its students, faculty, staff can play in helping in placemaking, as an example, or on the workforce development, from multiple facets. One being a talent pipeline, but two, also helping with scaling up existing workforce, non-traditional workforces, et cetera. And so you think about those roles that I think particularly universities can play in their regions that, that are in their backyard and within their states are real critical. And I think rethinking that and having the resources to be able to rethink that appropriately would be very beneficial.
And Regina Thompson, it looks like she's just completed a proposal. And Regina, I don't know where you're from, but we'd love to hear from you. You said that you were really interested in reaching more remote communities and helping with workforce challenges. Do you want to be more specific? Would you like to chime in and talk about how you're proposing to do that?
Sure. Let me see if my camera is working here. I'm working off a new laptop today. Okay, here we are. We just recently submitted a proposal. I'm from Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. So Palm Beach County, considered South Florida, but not as south as Miami-Dade. And we have a lot of touch points already within our community, in Boca and West Palm. They're moving up with more, startup tech and other tech companies. So we were looking at more of the remote communities, such as out west, out by, more of the agricultural land and other areas where maybe there's not as much access to resources. So we were thinking of connecting those communities to the opportunities we have right next door to our campus. So mobilizing ourselves, whether it would be like a mobile unit or whether it would be, branching out to other local organizations that do something similar and partnering with them. But those were our ideas, seeing what the community needs and helping them with either building their community with civic innovation or what programming and development that they require to get certain jobs.
Yeah, great. I think, Regina, that makes a lot of sense. One of the common themes I'm hearing us all say is more boots on the ground and sort of having a presence in communities, which is something that I'd expected. Carolyn, I see you have your hand up, and then John.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Carolyn Freiberger. I'm the Assistant Director of Economic Development for NC Growth, which is an EDA University Center at UNC Chapel Hill. We're just starting our third round as an EDA University Center. So we were established in 2012 originally. At any rate, I think my thoughts are very much in line with what's just been said, but to add some real kind of specifics to it. So the state of North Carolina, we serve the entire state. We seek out economically distressed communities, which most of them are rural, but we do also work in our urban areas because, of course, there are areas of economic distress there as well. North Carolina is a very wide state. So doing the work that we do, it means that we're traveling anywhere from an hour to even 4 hours one way to get to our clients. And so additional funding, I think, would really enable us, one, to really invest in that travel. I think showing up in communities is more important than ever. With COVID, we've really shifted all of our internal meetings to be remote, but we are really prioritizing the travel to be in person with our community clients. So that would be a big one. And then actually being able to have staff who are located in those communities. So we actually have one staff member who lives who's based in northeastern North Carolina, which is about 3.5 hours from Chapel Hill, where the university is. And we're about to hire a person through a different funding stream, but that would be based in southwestern North Carolina, which is about 4 hours from UNC Chapel Hill. So that has been very successful for us to be able to hire some remote staff to really broaden our reach. And then we also hire graduate students from about 20 different universities in North and South Carolina. And those students also are actually scattered across the state. So being able to do that, more of that, I think that's what we would do with more funds, is just more of all of that to really, increase that presence on the ground, echoing what others have said.
And John, I know you had your hand up as well.
Yeah. Carolyn, I was going to suggest we call on you in a second, just because you're a flagship, right? So some of us are land grants and some of us are regional comprehensives, and, but there's really all kinds of universities in the program. And I do think that's kind of always been interesting to me, in the way that they all deal with it. I do think this question about like size of universities, so like an R1 like you or me has a different ability to spread our own peanut butter over the bread we get from, or spread the EDA peanut butter over, well, I don't know what the metaphor should be, but you know what I'm saying. And I think, one of the ways that we've tried to deal with that sort of geographic challenge, our main campus, we have campuses statewide. And at this point, I have offices my main office is in the most rural part of Virginia, but I have a couple of offices in the urban crescent. And actually one of those, when we came out of the 2010 recession, Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is in the eastern kind of coastal part of our state, was very challenged economically. It was producing jobs, like it was coming out of the recession with job production that made it look like a challenged city in the Midwestern Rust Belt. Forgive me for using that pejorative term that I know some people don't like. But I think, what we did to kind of move our EDA programming into that region was to start partnering with other universities. And it spreads the even tiny amount of money even smaller. But, we've done that with 2 different universities, most recently with our senior HBCU in Virginia, Virginia State. And I think it's been, that's right. But I think it's been a way to, with our HBCU partner, we're using it to leverage other kinds of things. So really just treating, and they're a big partner in our Build Back Better proposal. And we're really just treating the UC partnership as kind of a starting point for a much larger conversation around capacity building and what we both want to do in economic development. So that geography is tough, but again, more money would help. But I think more money, would help also maybe help us bring more people in as partners rather than competitors. And that might be appealing to pivot this around to our friends in EDA when they think about giving more money to a program like this.
Well, and John, I think that's an important point for a lot of reasons. One of the initial idea for this came from a piece of legislation that was introduced by Senator Brown that had that recommended additional funding for the University Center program and to codify it into law. One of the challenges with some of the amounts that were thrown around in that piece of legislation is would a university get the matching funds if the match requirement is the same. To John's point, one of the benefits of partnering like we do with OU is that we can split that match in half. The funding from EDA is also split in half, but still, for a smaller university, or a regional university like us, right, that can help make a difference to not only spread the match out, but also build a stronger partnership that covers more of the geography of the state. So, I wanted to reinforce your point, John. And on that issue, I think this might be a great point to pivot a bit towards, and I think Sheila was getting at this in the chat. Are there ways that we can use sort of, the partnership model in university centers to really address some of the, economic equity, inclusion, some of those kind of issues that I know that EDA has been very interested in the university center program becoming more engaged with. So, John mentioned that he's partnered with his HCBU. Are there other folks on the phone or on the call here who have examples of doing something similar like that, of partnering, even if it is outside of the university center program, on different regional initiatives or some other pieces that deal with equity and inclusion growth issues in their communities?
We, particularly related to university centers, I think one of the good examples where we had partnered was early on during COVID. We were one of the first states to get a statewide survey out the door, and we ended up working particularly. It's kind of ironic with the University Center over in University of Nebraska Omaha and University of Nebraska Lincoln, helping them basically use our survey and our framework that we developed on it. And then also folks down in Nevada and a couple other states used it. And what I said was ironic is it's kind of unusual where the governor of another state actually compliments in a press conference when the releases of a statewide survey of a university center that's in another state, but that's what happened for us. So that dynamic, and as I mentioned earlier, we work closely with Iowa State University, and Iowa's kind of unique. We only have 3 state universities, so it's a small sandbox for us to be playing in. And as I mentioned earlier, in our UC work within the particularly Industry 4.0 effort at the statewide level, Iowa State University's manufacturing extension, their CIRRUS program is in the lead, and we've been working with them for for a number of years.
Great. There was, John, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Drew, can you talk a little bit? We talked about partnerships, but you guys are actually 2 separate university center programs in one state.
Yep.
So it might be interesting to folks, particularly. I think, maybe like 20, when I first came in, I know we had 2 in Virginia, but differentiating between those 2, right? Do you guys make a big focus on that?
Well, it's, as I said, I was a small sandbox. And so we worked together on a lot of things. Us, particularly University of Northern Iowa and Iowa State. We work a lot. My program works a lot with extension. Iowa State's the land grant school. So, it's just common practice here because there's, we're involved in so many different statewide and regional initiatives together. So it's just natural habit. And I told Russell when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, I was really intrigued about how they're doing it there with Bowling Green in Ohio U, because we've actually last time around we actually had some initial discussions with Iowa State. Do we look at a joint application together? And because we have certain expertise here, my team, we're 100% outward facing. We're economic development practitioners out in communities every single day, where Iowa State as an R1 institution brings some different uniquenesses and expertise. And so there's some real potential, as I look at it, of how within a region, not only within like the state of Iowa, but like this part of the country, of how, whether it's Northern Illinois University, or like I said, University of Nebraska, Omaha, and Iowa State, and University of Missouri, how we each have different expertise and specialties where we can bring to bear to work on a regional issue.
Yeah, no, that's great, Drew. I think another piece that I've found difficult, or on the partnership piece, and I like the conversation that's going on about partnering with your local Federal Reserve Bank, which I think is a really important piece. Having guest speakers, for instance, during COVID, we partnered with the Cleveland Fed on looking at exchanging, providing survey data back and forth between our different organizations when we were collecting, impact data on COVID. So, I think that's a great model. But another partnership that we've really, looked at, and again, I think this is a function of us not having economic development districts, is, we really partner with a lot of local communities and governments on actually helping them prepare EDA applications through public works or economic adjustment assistance programs, et cetera. And, I think that's an interesting, as I've gone through, that's for us has been a really great way to make partners across the whole region, even with, other nonprofit organizations who do technical assistance, right? Helping them navigate, the EDA's process and reporting and all that kind of fun stuff has really allowed us to become sort of a real hub in the region for anything EDA, which, I think is a great model to help build partnerships. So, having that EDA sort of stamp of approval as being a funded organization in your region or state, I really do think makes quite a difference.
That's great, Russell. I think it also gives you a sort of bird's eye view of all of the programs that EDA is funding in your region, so that you can help to coordinate and leverage those resources across the programs, which I think is what EDA really wants to see.
Yeah, I agree. So, we briefly touched a bit on economic equity and inclusion issues, but I was hoping, we could, think about some different ways to expand that, right? So the ARENI initiative that we're doing at UITA really has three core elements, as Sheila mentioned early on. It's really about networks around resiliency, networks around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then also around the University Center program. But to the degree possible, we've been looking for ways to see where there's intersections between those three networks and where there might be some overlap. So anybody on the call today have experience, if you are a university center working on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, or on resiliency issues, whether that be natural man-made disasters or also economic resiliency initiatives.
Well, as we had talked, as I mentioned earlier, when you and Sheila and I had a conversation, just the whole dynamic of COVID being thrown in the last few years, we've had to focus in on resiliency and how it, and the one thing is how it's impacted different communities. And so I look at the work we've done under our UC umbrella related to COVID. As I mentioned, we've done 4 statewide COVID business impact surveys. And one of the things that we've been doing is producing local reports of that data. If a community or a county or a region had enough respondents in those surveys, we'd provide them local data that they were able to use in their actions and strategy development to try to help impacted communities, impacted businesses. One thing on the equity side of things, our previous award was a focus on raising capacity within regions for entrepreneurship. And one of the areas that we worked on was here in the metro that we're located, which has one of the more diverse communities in the state of Iowa. And so we did an intentional effort on both business retention, expansion, and entrepreneurship capacity building within some of the underserved populations. And some of the legacies out of that work is now a Black Business Accelerator that has been launched, and they're on their fourth cohort of entrepreneurs on that. And so we're still here at the university supporting that, but it's being led by a local nonprofit now. And so some of that's legacy work that is over time has had an impact.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, it's interesting. Legacy over time having an impact is ringing in my ears as I was thinking about what I wanted to share. On the economic resilience kind of challenge, right? We spent a lot of time during the previous, world-beating economic collapse in 2008-10, thinking and working with folks to mobilize for larger opportunities, both with EDA, but also on the legacy side, I think, working to do some kind of really thoughtful sector-driven workforce stuff with various competition funds that were available for USDOL at the time. And what I think we did great with that is kind of build a relational, like strategic legacy with the workforce partners in kind of the rural third of our state to do more long-term kind of stuff. And I think, that's the trick of this, right? We get into these emergencies, whether it's, the housing collapse then or the COVID crisis now. And I think, there's a lot of great stuff that, you can look at in terms of, like responding to disaster, and sort of building up from disasters. But when I talk to folks who are doing that kind of, economic resilience kind of research, they get all sweaty when you start trying to talk about, how do you build like longer term, more resilient economies. And I think I think scale matters. I think, long-term relationships that can be more strategic matter. Some of the employer partners in our Build Back Better proposal were people we started working with back then, right? And they've grown and made long-term commitments to the university that have, outlasted some of these crises, but also just normal business cycles. And I think one other thing kind of on the equity/DEI side is to kind of make sure you're thinking about it as both. So I know, we've had some, again, we're doing some great capacity building work, I think, with our HBCU partner in the UC program. We're doing, we've got in Hampton Roads, as we moved out there, we've got, some work with a Black Chamber group that one of our alumni is running there. And they're doing talk about long-term again, they're doing 150-year strategic plan. So I love talking about that, right? Some other things about college access we've done in the more urban parts of our state. But I think the other thing to think about is also to think about it economically. And if you haven't seen it, before we break, I'll try to drop Tim Bartik at Upjohn just did a great, powerful piece on sort of reforming policy to think both about region and neighborhood. So really to think about, not just people in an economy, but people in place, right? To sort of have a multi-layered thinking about the strategy. Oh, that's so exciting. Seriously, Sheila? Oh man, y'all better come back in September for that. Yeah. Let's make sure we drop that link in there because that'd be a great pre-read. But I think, thinking about it, both as sort of, a question about people and a question about populations that have been underrepresented and excluded, but also thinking about, about place. And I know, we had to wrestle with that in our Build Back Better thing because we definitely had, we had a geography that spanned, disconnected and socially and economically disconnected Appalachian communities. But we also had, communities in Southern Virginia that were, large or majority Black populations that also had, for very different reasons, been dispossessed and disconnected. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff to wrap your arms around in that, which is why it's a tough question to pose in the abstract. But I think, there's just tons of great work to do. Oh, that's great. Thanks for dropping that link, Sheila.
Yeah, and I'll also chime in here. One of the it's in the Journal of Politics. It just came out. It was a great article about the economic costs of what they call democratic backsliding. Another great article that sort of looks at how important protections in diversity, equity, inclusion can be in attracting workers to places. But one of the things that's come up in our work in placemaking in rural communities in particular has been when we talk to folks. So in a lot of cases, what we're doing is talking to people who work in the town or in the community that we're working in, but who choose to live elsewhere, and we sort of ask them some in-depth questions about why they do that. One of the big issues that's come up is respect towards diverse populations, or the lack thereof, is a reason for why people are choosing to live in other places. And it's been a real enlightening conversation to have with these communities, because they know they have a problem, and what they're really looking for are some solutions. And so, our team's been talking internally about how do we sort of help provide a toolkit and for communities to really engage in these difficult conversations that they need to have with their leaders and elected officials, to really sort of change that perception and to make meaningful change in their communities, to make their economies and processes and governance structures much more inclusive and diverse. So again, as John mentioned, there's a lot of great work to do in this space. And it really does cover all of the areas that a lot of our university centers do touch upon.
Thanks, Russell. I want to pause here for a moment, because we're going to start launching some other poll questions here soon, just to make sure that we get people's reaction to what we've been talking about today before they leave. But I want to keep the discussion going as we launch the poll. So Spencer's going to go ahead and launch those polls, but we're just trying to get a sense of where people are working and how resources like this can help them in their work. But we might want to think about moving to question 3. Well, we talked a little bit about, Russell, how you're helping folks in your community take advantage of additional EDA funding. I wonder if other folks are also doing that. Whether or not folks are finding success in helping to leverage those different programs for EDA funding. Anybody?
To that question, Sheila, we have development district councils of governments here in Iowa, and we work very closely with them. And really, I see the role that we play in a UC is helping to make good referrals to them. Being, that way we're informed of the economic adjustment programs, the public work programs, and all that, so that if we are in a community, we can say, hey, reach out to your council of government. They can help you pull together a grant application for that. And so that connector role, I think, is really important that we play in a university center. I'm sure most others play.
Yeah, and I find our role often being to help vet proposals, and really take ones that might be nascent or underdeveloped. If somebody has an idea and they think EDA can fund that, and really help work with them on, is it serving more than one business, right? Some of the basics of a public works project through EDA. Where's your match? All that kind of fun stuff. Really helping get those things in line before they move forward for that initial conversation. We also oftentimes I will usually be the point person to reach out to our EDR to make the connection between a community or an entity and our EDR in the state, and that usually helps with the conversation. So yeah, I think there's a lot of roles we can play in doing that.
The other thing that I bet a lot of folks are doing too, and I know it's something we do, is, in addition to, sending things to EDA, is also, getting people kind of packaged around multiple funding streams. And it's tricky and it's artful, but certainly, the need to develop match. And there's all kinds of different state programs in the field right now that, I think can be artfully packaged as match with EDA opportunity.
I think what James just posted in the chat is actually very important. I think, right, it's something that we do a lot of, right? So, when we're out doing our, meetings and technical assistance, oftentimes somebody will come up with yeah, boy, it would be great if we had this, right? What would a study on housing in 3 counties look like, right? And that's when we always tell folks, well, there are additional fund, right? Our university center is not the world of funding that EDA has available for research and studies like this. And so once you make that connection, that often helps also, think about additional work that my team can be doing, that other consultants or other nonprofits in our region can be doing for different topics that are available. So yeah, I think that's a great point that was posted there in the chat.
Thanks, Russell. As we're launching the feedback questions, I'm going to go ahead and close us out with some information about our upcoming convening, which is going to be a combination of the equity network that UITA has, or the equity network for ARENI, and the place network of UITA, and that'll be on, sorry, the 27th of July. And it'll be in the usual spot for the place network. And we're going to talk about the eco districts framework, which is a neighborhood-based framework for assessing equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and resilience for neighborhoods. And so we're going to talk about how universities might be able to apply that framework to their campuses, to their innovation districts, or to other neighborhoods that they influence. So please remember to stay tuned for that. And now that in September, and that'll be the first Wednesday of September, our resilience convening will be with Timothy Bardick, and he'll be our provocateur to discuss issues of neighborhood resilience. And then finally, I just want to remind you of the UITA Summit that'll be happening October 9th through 12th. And we will have the first day of that summit will be the ARENI Accelerator Day. And so we will be having sessions that are specifically geared towards these topics of resilience, equity, and university centers. So we hope to see all of you there. We'll be continuing those conversations in person at the summit and also on our Member 365 discussion platform. So stay around and answer the feedback questions. And I want to thank our hosts, Drew and Russell, for facilitating a great conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed today. Any other comments or questions?
Well, thanks for everyone who participated today.
Thank you, everybody. This was great. I appreciate it.